Why do we keep recreating the same reality? Why do we keep having the same relationships? Why do we keep getting the same jobs over and over again? In this infinite sea of potentials that exist around us, how come we keep recreating the same realities? Isn't it amazing that we have options and potentials that exist, but we're unaware of them? Is it possible that we're so conditioned to our daily lives, so conditioned to the way we create our lives, that we buy the idea that we have no control at all? We've been conditioned to believe that the external world is more real than the internal world. This new model of science says just the opposite. It says what's happening within us will create what's happening outside of us.
There's a physical reality that is absolutely rock solid, and yet it only, if you want to put it this way, it only comes into existence when it bumps up against some other piece of physical reality. That other piece may be us, and of course we're partial to those moments. But it doesn't have to be either. It could be just some incidental rock comes flying along and interacts with this fuzzy mass of stuff, and sure enough, it provokes it into a particular state of existence.
And there were philosophers in the past that said, look, if I kick a rock and I hurt my toe, that's real. I feel that, it feels real, it's vivid, and that means that it's reality. But it's still an experience, and it's still this person's perception of it being real.
Scientific experiments have shown that if we take a person and hook their brains up to certain PET scans or computer technology and ask them to look at a certain object, and they watch certain areas of the brain light up, and then they've asked them to close their eyes and now imagine that same object. And when they imagine that same object, it produced the same areas of the brain to light up as if they were actually visually looking at it. So it caused scientists to back up and ask this question. So who sees then? Does the brain see? Or do the eyes see? And what is reality? Is reality what we're seeing with our brain? Or is reality what we're seeing with our eyes? And the truth is that the brain does not know the difference between what it sees in its environment and what it remembers, because the same specific neural nets are then firing. So then it asks the question, what is reality?
We're bombarded by huge amounts of information, and it's coming into our body, and we're processing it, coming in through our sense organs, and it's percolating up, and at each step we're eliminating information, and finally what is bubbling up to consciousness is the one that's the most self-serving.
The brain processes 400 billion bits of information a second, but we're only aware of 2,000 of those. But our awareness of those 2,000 bits of information are just about the environment, our body, and about time. It's processing 400 billion bits of information, and when our awareness is only on 2,000, that means reality is happening in the brain all the time. It's receiving that information, and yet we haven't integrated it.
The eyes are like the lens, but the tape that's really seeing is the back of the brain. It's called the visual cortex. It's right back here. It's like this camera, and it's tape. Did you know that the brain imprints what it has the ability to see? Now, this is important. For example, this camera is seeing a lot more around me than what is here, because it has no objection and no judgment. The only movie that's playing in the brain is what we have the ability to see. So is it possible our eyes, our cameras see more than what our brain has the ability to consciously project?
Well, the way our brain is wired up, we only see what we believe is possible. we match patterns that already exist within ourselves through conditioning. So a wonderful story that I believe is true is that when the Indians, the Native American Indians on the Caribbean islands, saw Columbus's ships approaching, they couldn't see them at all because it was so unlike anything they had ever seen before. They couldn't see it.
We create reality. We're reality-producing machines. We create the effects of reality all the time.
We always perceive something after reflection in the mirror of memory.
Holodeck or not, it's a question that we don't necessarily have a good answer to. I think this is a big philosophical problem that we have to deal with in terms of what science can say about our world, because we are always the observer in science. So we are still always constrained by what is ultimately coming into the human brain that allows us to see and perceive the things that we do. So it is conceivable that all of this really is just a great illusion that we have no way of really getting outside of to see what is really out there.
Your brain doesn't know the difference between what's taking place out there and what's taking place in here.
There is no out there, independent of what's going on.
Our choices in the direction of how a life can go that are contingent upon small level quantum effects not being washed out.
First of all, let's talk about the subatomic world, and then we'll talk about what it's telling us about reality. The first thing I want to tell you about the subatomic world is it's totally a fantasy created by mad physicists trying to figure out what the heck is going on when they do these little experiments. By little experiments, I mean big energy in little spaces and little pieces of time. It gets pretty nutty at that realm of things, and so subatomic physics was invented to try to figure that all out. We need a new science down there. It's called quantum physics, and it is subject to a whole range of debatable hypotheses, thoughts, feelings, intuitions as to what the heck is really going on.
Matter is not what we have long thought it to be. To the scientist, matter has always been thought of as sort of the ultimate in that which is static and predictable.
Within all the atoms and molecules, all the space within the particles take up an insignificant amount of the volume of an atom or molecule, the fundamental particles. The rest of it is vacuum.
What seems to happen is that particles appear and disappear all the time. So where do they go when they're not here? Now, that question is tricky. I'm going to give you two answers. Answer number one, they go into an alternative universe where the people in that universe are asking the same question about those particles when they come into our universe. They say, where do they go?
There's a great mystery called the mystery of the direction of time. There's a certain sense in which the fundamental laws of physics that we have don't make any interesting distinction, say, between past and future. For example, it's a puzzle from the standpoint of the fundamental laws of physics. Why we should be able to remember the past and not have the same kind of epistemic access to the future. It's a puzzle from the standpoint of these laws why we should think something like, by acting now, we can affect the future but not the past. These things, that we have a different kind of epistemic access to the past and the future, that we have a different kind of control by acting now over the future than we do over the past. These things are so fundamental to the way we experience the world that that it seems to me not to be curious about them is to be, 3/4 of the way to being dead.